All right, doing this video in response to a question I got. So someone a while ago, I'd done a series on using Microsoft Forms to create tasks in Planner. So when a form is submitted, you want to create a task in Planner for that. One of the aspects of creating that task is creating checklist items. And in that video way back then, I had shown kind of how to do this in more or less a static way, either using a question in the form itself or some other kind of less dynamic ways. But I mentioned that you could do it more dynamically, and I wanted to explain what I meant by that and show a quick example of it, hopefully quick. Now I already have, this is a slightly different scenario here. I have basically I'm planning an event, and I have a form that I'm using to allow people to submit to be speakers at this event. So I'm just going to walk through the form, then I'll talk about how I've set up the sort of the dynamic checklist items that will be generated for the tasks. So basically, this is our form where people can submit to speak, provide one of three types of presentations, either a success story, which will be a 45-minute talk, technical talk of 45 minutes, or a lightning talk of 5 minutes. Now, each of these, because they have slightly different areas of expertise, slightly different purposes, are going to have slightly different checklist items involved. So in other words, I want to create a task when someone submits this form. Let's say they submit a success story. I want to assign that task to someone who's going to a single person who's going to be responsible for reviewing all of those success story submissions. And I want to give them some checklist items of things to basically how to evaluate that submission so they can decide what steps they need to take to determine if that's going to be accepted or not. So jumping over to the SharePoint site that's connected to this, or that's involved here, basically there's a speaker submissions list. So this is a list that eventually when people submit that form, I already have a flow that creates an item in this list and takes their attachments and moves them a certain place, etc., etc. Not going to worry. I'm actually just going to tack this new flow or this new functionality onto that flow rather than creating a separate flow. But I'm going to do another video on that process a bit later. But essentially in here I have a call for speaker task data. So this is going to identify for each of these types of talks who is the task going to be assigned to, and then what are those checklist items. And you'll note here that I have the checklist items separated with a pipe character. That's that kind of vertical bar that is at the top of the backslash character. So if you hit shift backslash, that's the character. And I'm using that because it's unique. You're not going to use that you're probably never going to use that in one of the checklist items itself. Whereas other separators like commas, semicolons, etc., you might want to use in a checklist item. So I want something that was going to be uniquely identifiable, because we'll need that to split these out into individual checklist items. But you'll see that for each of them, they're slightly different. Some of the steps are the same, but there are some variances from one to the other. So that's what we're going to add as the checklist items. So I'm going to go over to Power Automate. So again, this is the flow that I already have that basically gets those response details, gets the profile of the person who submitted the response, creates a folder, and then moves the files that they submitted into that folder, and then creates the item in that SharePoint list. So now that we have all that, I want to, at this point, create a task that's assigned to that particular person. So how am I going to do that? First, I'm going to say add an action. We're going to start simple with a get items, because we want to get the items from this list, or get the appropriate item, I should say, to match what they have selected, or what type of talk they're doing. So I'm going to do a get items And even though I know that I'm only going to get one item because I'm going to get the one that matches, because you'll note that this title is a direct match to the choice that they're making on the form. So this get item actions is only going to return a single item, but I still need to use items because I don't know the ID of that item, but I need to use a filter to get the information. All right, so I'm going to select my site address. It's going to be my M365 showcase site. The list name is going to be call for speaker task data. And then I need to use an OData filter. So basically this is where I'm going to say return the item that matches the type of talk that they're giving. So I put that value in the title field of our list, so it'll be title, EQ, and then it's important to use single quotes around the value. And then I can simply get from the dynamic content, the submission, where is it? From the get response details, I want the submission type. That's going to be the answer to that question. Simple enough. So one title will match that. Now it is important that if you were to change that text on the form, that you change those titles in the list. If one changes without the other being changed, then this flow will break. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to return that item, and I'll just say get items task data for speak type, or I'll just say for type, whatever. All right, that's all we need right here. So now, as I said, this get items is always going to return data as an array, even though in this case it will be an array of one item. So just to avoid doing any sort of needing to do any looping or getting any surprise applied to each loops, I'm going to add in a couple more actions here. I'm going to use select, and the select action this will be select ID of type, and the array we're selecting from is going to be the body of the get items action. And I can basically switch normally you would put in a key here, so if I wanted to get maybe the title and the data of that, but in this case I want to get a single value, just an array of single values, which would be, I can switch this over to text mode and simply plug in here ID. Now you'll see that it does throw that into this apply to each, but you can simply move it out of there. That's just a quirk with the new designer here. It just sort of always does that, so don't be afraid. You can simply move it out. Now what that's going to return is a single column array with the ID. So then I can do a get item against that same list. Showcase task data, and the ID here I'm going to use the first expression because it wants the ID number, so I'm going to return the first output from the select action there. So that's it. So just to do a quick test here, if I save this and I go over and I submit, say I'm giving a technical talk, no co-presenters, it'll be how Forms is awesome. Forms is really cool, and I'll talk about how cool it is. There we go. And then I'm just going to upload some random documents here, just nothing specific, just some, and then I do need to upload an image. So I'll just grab that image. There we go. Doesn't matter. These are just samples because I need to attach files there. And I'll click submit, and we'll jump over to our flow and see that it ran. Well, it's running. Because it was doing some other stuff with the files first, I'm just going to take a moment or two to run. But if we open this up, we can see it running and see when it gets to that step. All right, so we got the task item. There's a big ugly blob of text or blob of response data. We got the ID, which is 2, and then we got that item. So we have all of the relevant data, including what we need there ultimately are these checklist items. All right, so I had to do all that just to get the checklist items. Now you can do it without this select and the get item, but I like to do that just because it simplifies the data structure a little bit, makes it easier to work with down the line. All right, so now we want to go about parsing out those checklist items into individuals. So the way I'm going to do that is with a split action or split expression. So I'm going to add an action. It'll be compose. And I'm going to split. Oh, actually, you need to go click the FX button or function button here to insert an expression, and the expression will be split. And then the dynamic content is going to be from our get item, and it will be the, now it's not showing me the checklist item, so I need to click this see more, and it'll show me all of those items. So now I want to find the checklist items. There we go. Now split takes a string and splits it into an array. Now we do need an array because that's how we need to feed those checklist items or create those checklist items. Now you need, when you're using the split expression, you need to provide it the string to split and then what character you want to use to split it. This is where you'll see why I use that pipe character, because the split character or characters, sorry I forgot a comma, single quote, and then I'll use space, pipe, space, because you'll note that in those checklist items, every specific item was separated with a space and a pipe and a space. So that's our delimiter. That way we're going to get back out just an array of those items. Click add. There we go. And that'll just be compose checklist items. Okay, so the next step is going to be setting up our array of checklist items, because that's how we're going to add those items, those checklist items, to our task. So to do that, we need a variable, because we need to basically build that array variable. And so I'll add an action, initialize variable, and we'll just call it var checklist items, and it'll be of type array, and just rename this checklist items. And then I need another variable, which will be a counter variable, because we need to assign those checklist numbers, ID numbers for those checklist items. Again, we'll initialize variable. There we go. And this will be var checklist ID. Actually, I'll call it checklist number just to be clear. And this will be an integer value, and the initial value will be 1. So basically, as we're building this array of checklist items, the first checklist item will be 1, and then 2, and 3, and et cetera, et cetera. All right, so let's Set that. All right, so now we can go about building our checklist array. So I'm going to add another action here, and this time it will be an apply to each loop. So there are times when you just can't avoid using an apply to each loop, and the variable or the data that the input for this apply to each loop is going to be the output of the composed checklist items, because remember we took that string, separated it into an array of items, so there we go. Now within our apply to each, we need to do two things. First, we need to append to that checklist items variable with checklist item. So we will do append to array variable. And the form, first we need to append to checklist items, and the value, we need to use the appropriate format for this, which is going to be, doing this a little bit from memory here, so let me just refer to my notes. Alright, so we're going to append a curly brace. You don't have to put this on new lines. I just do it because it makes it look it's a little easier to read. So the first thing is ID. This is going to be the ID number, and the value there is going to be the checklist number. All right. So again, we're initializing that at 1. So the first time this loop runs, it'll be 1, and then we need a comma, and then we need title. This is going to be the name of the checklist item. And in this case, because we are running this on the checklist items, it's going to be the first item in that array. Or really, we can think of it as the exact item. So I'll just use the item expression here. So function item. Now, because we are just getting those values, then I just need that item there. That's it. And then the last thing we need is the is_checked. And I'm not 100% sure this is still required, but I'm going to put it in there anyway. But basically, this just sets by default whether the checklist item is checked or not. So I'm going to set it to false, but we need to be sure to use the function false, not just the word false. So I'm going to select that, click add, and then we need to close out our curly brace. All right, so that's that. Then we are appending to array var checklist items. Okay. Now the next thing we need to do is increment that checklist number variable, because the second time this loop runs, it needs to set the ID to 2 and then 3, and et cetera, et cetera. So we need to add another action here, and this will be increment variable. And what variable is it incrementing? The checklist number. It's the only integer value we have, and it's the only one it can. It's going to increment it by 1. And we'll just rename this to var checklist number. And there we go. All right, so now our last step is to create that planner task. So create task, create a task in planner. The group ID is going to be M365 Showcase. The planner ID, or plan ID rather, is the plan that I created, which is M365 Showcase Planner. Really exciting, I know. The title of this is going to be whatever they entered in as the title for their presentation. So I'll put in, and I think on the form I called that topic, title or topic, yeah. So we'll put in that. And then just to make it unique, we'll put in their display name from that. From the get user profile action. All right, just so we know who it was that submitted this. All right, so now when we're creating a task, we can't show it. Oh, actually, did they update? They did update this, so we can actually set a bunch of things here. Can I set the assign to? Yes, I can. Cool. I don't think this was here before, but we can set the assign to, and we're going to get that from from dynamic content. And I'm going to search for assign to. So we've got the get item, and we want assign task to email. All right. So that is that. Now we can't. So it's got all these things to set the priority, or set priorities, set labels, but we can't add checklist items here yet. So that's still a separate action. So we need to create our task, which is fine. Then we need to update our task to add those checklist items. So update task, update a task. Oh, sorry, it's update task details. There we go. So in here, yeah, there's our checklist items. All right, so the task ID is going to be the task that we just created. So that'll be ID of the task from our create task action. I'm not going to add a description, but I am going to add in our checklist. Now, normally when you're adding this checklist, this is where you would add in the ID, the title is checked, etc. But I'm going to switch this to array mode because I want to basically just take our variable, that array variable that we just built, and I'm just going to plug that in straight, so I don't need to do anything else. So basically just inside here, I'm going to take all that away and drop in var checklist items. Done. That's it. That's all we need to do. Now, one thing I do want to do is, I think when I was appending here, I used capital D, and it should be a lowercase d. So let me just fix that. Probably is going to work either way, but no, let me leave it as capital. We'll go with that and see what happens. All right, so I'm going to hit save. Now, I can't just rerun the flow because since I added planner actions here, if I try to rerun a previous flow, it's just going to fail on me. So let me go in and submit another response. This time the person is going to do a lightning talk and no co-presenters, and it's going to be how to attach files to a Teams chat. All right, and we'll just, that's pretty good for the executive abstract as well. I'll upload a quick file here. Again, I'll just grab some random Word document and then upload an image and some random image. Upload that. Submit our form. And then we're going to jump back over and wait for that flow to run so I can see that it's started. And I know it's going to take a few seconds, so we'll just wait it out because it's going to do some stuff with those files. It's going to move them to the appropriate place. And we'll jump in and see where it is. All right, so it's flow ran successfully, created a task. So let's go over to that plan. Open that plan in a new window, or new tab rather. Hey, there is How to Attach Files to a Teams Chat by Andrew Carter. And if I open this up, there are the 4 checklist items matching the 4 for a lightning talk. So there you go. So that is basically how we can do that. Now, this is dynamic because if I want to change those checklist items, which chances are, if you're using this for other things, like maybe you're creating a task that's assigning, having someone test something, or someone request something, or someone fill out a form, those checklist items are probably going to change with some frequency. So you don't necessarily want to update your form all the time with new checklists, to reflect the new checklist items. But this way, if I decide, actually I want all of these to have one additional step, I can basically just come into the list and change, or if I need to remove a step, I can come in here and maybe remove the step where they're reviewing materials. Now, obviously, this isn't going to have any impact on existing tasks. So if the task was already created with the old checklist items, it's not going to go in and remove those checklist items, but it's going to take effect for any new submissions to the form. So again, this might not seem like a really practical use case for your situation, but I think it's a good example to show what's possible, because essentially once you define these checklist items, and again, the important thing is to use a unique separator so that you'll be able to then parse them out later. And I did this with a single line of text column, which does have a limit of 255 characters. If you're going to have a lot of checklist items, more than 255 characters worth, you could do the same with a multiple lines of text column. Just make sure that you set it to plain text. Otherwise, there's going to be formatting code and stuff in there which could, foul things up a little bit. So again, use either a single line of text or multiple lines of text, plain text only, for your checklist items, and use a reliable separator. And there you go. So hopefully this was useful. Hopefully this answers that question. And again, I going to be recording another video later, basically covering the first part of this, how we're moving those files as opposed to other methods that I've used in the past. So please, if this was useful to you, like, subscribe, leave a comment down below if you have any questions, problems, etc.